Start the recording here. And yeah, thank you for joining us today for Safeguard Against Google Terminations and Clawbacks. We're lucky to be joined by attendees from all over the world today. So welcome to all of you, whatever time zone you may be in. My name is Braden Cave. I'm VP of Marketing here at Monetize More, and I'll be moderating today's session. I'm thrilled to have Cian Graham, our CEO and founder. And Cian's been navigating the ad tech landscape for over a decade. He's worked with, thousands of publishers to tackle their critical challenges while growing their businesses. So, Cian, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Braden. And I'd like to welcome everybody to this webinar. Thanks for joining us. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Monetize More, we're a Google certified publishing partner. We've been a partner for almost 10 years with Google. And just like many of you here, we work with publishers, right? We have a set of different products to help publishers to not just survive in this very difficult industry, but thrive, right? That's through monetization, tools to prevent ad fraud. We have tools to diagnose ad inventory issues live on the page. So we have several tools to essentially end those sleepless nights that publishers tend to have because they're so, as we all know, ad tech isn't easy. I think that's why we all went into the industry, because we love that challenge. And that's what Monetize More provides. So welcome everyone to the webinar.
Awesome. Thanks, Cian. Great intro. So as the title suggests, right, our focus is on the key challenges our supply side partners face, like navigating Google's stringent policies, managing traffic quality, and staying competitive in this ever-changing landscape, as Cian alluded to. So let's start things off with kind of the foundational piece of this, which is, Google Health Score. Cian, can you talk a little bit about Google Health Score? Why it is such a crucial metric for publishers to monitor, and walk us through kind of how it works and what it measures?
Yep. Yeah, for sure. So essentially the Google Health Score is Google's measure in terms of the quality of a Google certified publishing partner, right? It actually measures the health, and they break it down into three categories. There's the quality score, there's the growth score, and then there's a user advertiser score. And they have different sets of points. There's kind of like sub-scores within it, right? And this is how Google sees the quality of a GCPP, the Google Certified Publishing Partner, right? And the thing that kind of separates these three is the quality score, right? Because the quality score is the only one that can actually go into the negative. And if a GCPP is in the negative after a certain amount of time, then they go under the Google microscope. And if this isn't fixed, they can actually lose their MCM, their multi-customer management privileges. So essentially, they wouldn't be able to work with all their publisher customers to provide monetization to them, right? And this is a crucial privilege for many of the GCPPs here, right? That's like the core business models. That's almost like losing your business. So that's why it's so important to especially focus on the quality score.
Awesome. Thanks, Cian. So yeah, now that we understand that foundational piece, I'm really interested to just hear from our audience. Let's warm up our polling feature here. So just curious about everybody's kind of like understanding and perception of Google Health Score. You should see a poll on screen now. So if you can please participate in that, and then we'll be moving on with the rest of the content. Thanks. I see responses rolling in, so that's great. We'll just give it another kind of 10 seconds, and then we'll move on. Awesome. Thanks, guys. So, Cian, let's talk about one of the biggest factors that impact health score traffic quality, right? So can you explain how metrics like invalid traffic percentage, retention rate, and year-over-year growth tie into traffic quality?
Yep, absolutely. So there's the invalid traffic quality score. So that's what under the quality score. And that's actually the quality of the traffic coming in, right? Is it bot traffic? Is it human click farms, right? What is the risk factor of this traffic, right? So that's a really important score within the quality score category. And then there's also the termination score. So that's the percentage of terminations that a GCPP has, right? If it's too high, if there's too many terminations, then you can have actually a negative score as well, right? So that's kind of what I alluded to about having a negative quality score. It's invalid traffic score plus the actual termination score. So that's something to watch out for. But your quality of your traffic also affects categories outside of the quality score, like the retention rate, right? Because if you think about it, if you have invalid traffic and it causes terminations, then you actually lose those child publishers, right? Which hurts your retention rate. So if you get a lot of terminations, your retention rate goes down as well. And if you're also getting terminations and clawbacks, then that means you're losing revenue, right? So that will also impact your year-over-year revenue growth. So there are some kind of like outside impacting factors that you have to watch out for. Invalid traffic does not only affect the quality score, it affects many categories.
Awesome. Thanks, Kian. So obviously really important to a publisher's overall performance, right? As you mentioned, what happens if this gets out of control, right? So let's talk about some of the risks of invalid traffic and then even as far as terminations.
Yeah. So the first one and one of the most painful is the actual revenue loss from the clawbacks, right? So if you have high invalid traffic, then you can either get a clawback, which is a percentage of the revenue of a child publisher being deducted from your overall revenue. And if it's even more significant, it can cause a termination of the child publisher, right? So that means they lose all 100% of their unpaid ad revenue, right? So huge impact on your overall revenues, right? It can also cause some cash flow issues as well, especially sometimes what Google does is sometimes they'll claw back up to 90 days, right? So imagine if you're paying your publishers on a net 30 basis, and then they claw back an additional 60 days that you already paid them. All of a sudden, your publisher owes you money, and you're in this tricky situation where you're trying to get your that money back from the publisher, right? Not a situation that you want to be in. It can be very painful for GCPPs and MCMs. The second one is, if a child publisher gets terminated, they don't get access to Google demand again, right? And we all know how Google is such a big part of the overall demand spectrum, right? If you don't have Google within your ad inventory, then your RPMs and your revenues are going to crash down there. So having Google within competing within your ad inventory obviously is very important. Not getting access to Google demand is very painful, right? And then there's even some bigger things where it's not only going to affect your child publisher, but if you have a big too many terminations, if you have huge clawbacks, it can even lead to GCPP losing their MCM account and losing all their unpaid ad revenues of all their publishers, right? So not only would your child publishers lose access to Google demand, your company can lose access to Google demand. So it could be very painful, very catastrophic for GCPPs and MCMs. And it's really important to be aware of that risk. And then the final one is advertiser trust erosion, right? So advertisers are getting better data on the quality of traffic that publishers provide to them. right? So they're getting data in terms of what percentage of the traffic is invalid traffic, what is bot traffic or human click farms, what are the quality of the clicks that are going to their advertisements, right? And if they see high risk traffic for a particular domain or a particular MCM or GCPP, then they'll blacklist them. And if you get enough blacklists, then you get less competition for your ad inventory, lower RPMs and revenues. And of course, you become less competitive competing against all the other GCPPs and MCMs.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, we've all heard these horror stories, right, Kian, that happen within the industry. Let's break down IVT. Obviously, IVT is, at the root of all of this. Can you get into how general IVT and sophisticated IVT come into play?
Yeah, absolutely. So it kind of breaks down into general, which is kind of like the basic type of invalid traffic, the more simple type of invalid traffic, right? These are the type of bots that they don't change their IP, right? They they use very simple algorithms, right? And those are the ones that can be caught by an API or an IP blacklist, right? There's some MCMs or GCPPs or even publishers that create their own IP blacklist that they build over time. Sometimes they piggyback off of public blacklists as well, right? But that's only going to catch the basic, the GIVT, right? Because the most damaging, the most dangerous type of IVT is the sophisticated invalid traffic, right? This is the one that it's better at pretty much replicating human behavior, right? It's the type that can cause a lot of damage where they can send big sophisticated invalid traffic attacks to a particular publisher or even a Google certified publishing partner. There's some malintent there. Sometimes some hackers can be hired to do these type of attacks, right? And in order to catch sophisticated invalid traffic, you need a technology that has a JavaScript on page that detects the actual behavior of the user and attributes a risk factor to the user. Is it a bot? Is it a human click farm? How genuine are the clicks on the actual page, right? There's hundreds of factors that a technology needs to analyze to determine the risk factor of an invalid traffic, right? So what we've seen from publishers or other, say, MCMs or GCPPs, sometimes they build their own in-house solution with an IP blacklist, or they use an API, or maybe they're using something like Cloudflare that only catches the general invalid traffic. And then they have that false sense of confidence. They're like, okay, we got our blacklist, we got our API, we're good. And then, months or even years later, they get a giant clawback. They get a bunch of terminations due to invalid traffic. And they wonder, well, why did this happen? I had my IP blacklist. I was running an API. It's because you weren't protected against sophisticated invalid traffic that is the most dangerous and damaging to publishers and MCMs and GCPPs, right? So it's really important that you protect yourself with a proper strategies and with proper technology that will protect you from sophisticated invalid traffic.
Absolutely. So, Kian, obviously we understand this firsthand, as you know, right? We have a very interesting background related to this. So could you tell our audience a little bit more about our story and how we come to, not only learn so much about this, but eventually develop a product towards it?
Yep, absolutely. So as tough as it is to tell this story, I think it's really important to share it. This was the early days, back in the beginning of 2014, right? By that point, we are an MCM for about a year, right? We're pretty early to it. And we had a lot of revenue growth, right? We had our best 2 months, the November and December 2013. We grew like crazy. We had a lot of new publishers. We were accepting a lot of business. And as a new MCM, we were still learning, right? We were still kind of growing, and business was great, right? We were at the top of the mountain. What could go wrong? And then I was on a business trip in Asia. I was in Singapore at the time, and I received this email. This is the email that I received that changed everything. We went from the top of the mountain to the bottom, right, to the gully. This meant that we lost all our unpaid ad revenues, $2.2 million gone overnight. That's the revenues to monetize more and the revenues to all our publishers, right? So you can imagine what the fallout was, right? It was very damaging. One of the toughest times in my career and our team. And we lost a lot of publishers, of course, right? We had to deal with a lot of difficult situations. We were able to keep some. Luckily, a lot of publishers some of our publishers had their own ad exchange accounts, and they were not affected, right? But it was as difficult as it was a big learning period, right? So, after about 6 months of getting through this, we were able to build in some new protocol for diversifying our revenues, for building in better screening of publisher leads. And we were able to come up with a traffic quality strategy.
Awesome. Thanks, Ken. I mean, obviously, this kind of illustrates how quickly this can happen, right? And I, couldn't even imagine, how your heart must have just sank reading the email. But I'm curious for our audience. I just want to present another poll here. What's your experience been with clawbacks, right? We'd love to hear from you, see what your experience is. Obviously, we don't, want to revisit something like this email. But let's just take a minute and see here. Let me just. Yeah, interesting. And just for our audience, just to on the first poll, so how actively are you monitoring and working with to improve your Google Health score? 65% stated that it was a primary concern for the company. So interesting result there. Not necessarily a surprising one, but interesting for sure. All right, guys. So you can continue to respond to that poll, and we will move on. So, Kian, as you mentioned, obviously there's not necessarily a one-size-fits-all solution, but some of the most effective strategies for our supply side partners. What can they do to improve, traffic quality and continue to keep this at a high level?
Yeah. So hopefully you can learn from our painful situation that we had back in 2014, because we were there, right? So in terms of the steps that we went through, at the very basic level, in terms of having a strategy for traffic quality management, at the very basic level, there should be a regular traffic analysis, right? It's important to get access to the analytics of your publishers and to analyze those, right? To see if there's, where they're getting the traffic from. Are they buying traffic? Is it coming from organic? Is it coming from social media? Something that you all should know is invalid traffic comes from all sources. But invalid traffic tends to be higher from some sources compared to others. But even organic search has invalid traffic. And there's even invalid traffic that spoofs organic search to make it look like it comes from organic search when it's actually coming from different sources, right? So there are sections within Google Analytics that you can check the technology that the traffic is actually coming from. And if you see spikes from kind of questionable sources, then that can lead some suspicion and trigger like a deeper analysis. But keep in mind, this is not a sufficient strategy of just doing this, right? Because if you get a invalid traffic attack, you can only see the results after. The damage is already done. Sure, you can see it on, say, Google Analytics or whatever analytics program, but the damage is already done. No matter what you do, you can still be terminated or receive huge Google clawbacks. So the second one is probably a lot of you have heard about made for advertising sites, MFAs. It's important to screen and filter these MFAs, to not work with them, right? Because these type of websites are risky in terms of, running too many ads per page. There's obviously the content issues, but they also tend to have high invalid traffic, and they have a higher tendency of even purposely sending invalid traffic to inflate the revenue. So that's something to watch out for. And it's important to have a screening strategy, right? Whether you have your own compliance team or you're utilizing external resources, it's important to screen these publishers because, there's a lot of bad actors out there, right? And if you're working with everybody that comes through, you're introducing a lot of risk for your company. So it's really important to have a screening strategy, at least have a compliance team or utilize external technology. And then the third one is, just be mindful of what you're running between an API versus an on-page setup. Remember what I talked about between general IVT and sophisticated IVT, right? APIs, whether you have an internal one, IP blacklist, or you're using external APIs, it's only going to protect you from general invalid traffic, right? You need an on-page setup like JavaScript on-page using, sophisticated technology to detect sophisticated IVT and block it from viewing or clicking on any of the ads. So it's really important to be mindful of these three strategies when you're coming up with your overall traffic quality management strategy.
Interesting. Kian, let me just dive into the API versus on-page. Could you just tell me and the audience a little bit more about when they're considering each one of those approaches, or perhaps they're maybe using API currently, what do they really need to consider if debating moving to on-page, or like what's really the difference between those two?
Well, the API setup, it's a simpler setup, right? It's much easier to implement within your business. But the biggest consideration is how much risk you're introducing into your business, right? Because with an API, you're only protecting against general invalid traffic, right? Okay. With an on-page setup, when you have JavaScript on-page, utilizing a sophisticated enough technology to be able to detect some of the most sophisticated invalid traffic, across the web, to have that on-page setup protects you from general invalid traffic and sophisticated invalid traffic. And remember that sophisticated invalid traffic is the most dangerous and it can be the most damaging, right? And, these type of sophisticated hackers that create this type of invalid traffic, they're able to replicate this, invalid traffic to huge amount of scale, right? They can send millions of fake users to your publishers, across your network. So it can ramp up very quickly. Like we've seen these invalid traffic attacks, and they're very damaging, right? There are MCMs and GCPPs that have lost their accounts because of these.
Got it. Okay, thanks, Kian. So for our audience, I'm curious how you guys have been dealing with traffic quality management. I'm just going to present our final poll of the evening. I know we've asked you to participate in a few of these, but we'd love to hear kind of what your current strategy is. Right. So please provide that feedback, and we'll move on. Awesome. See some responses rolling in. Thank you. So, Kian, while those are rolling in, obviously you touched on, the clawback that we experienced. And really what Traffic Cop was born out of, right? So could you just expand a little bit on, the Traffic Cop story? And, we received the clawback. How does something like that happen to an organization turn into a product?
Yep. So going back to 2014, after kind of building back up, getting back to, a stable place, a big part of it was, how are we going to prevent this from ever happening again, right? We don't want the door completely open to another invalid traffic attack. So what we did was we researched to find technology that can detect and block invalid traffic. And we worked with a number of them. And what we found was these invalid traffic solutions, they did not specialize in preventing Google terminations and clawbacks, right? They mostly worked on the buy side, working with DSPs, with SSPs, with advertisers, right? Sell side was kind of like an afterthought, right? And they didn't really specialize in Google compliance as well, right? So we tried working with some. Even they provide detection, but even to set up blocking, we'd have to set up a custom solution with developers. It took a lot of resources. It was very difficult for publishers that didn't have developers themselves. So we kind of thought there has to be a better way, right? There has to be a better way to do this, especially something that is more customized towards this problem in the industry, especially focused on the sell side with Google compliance. So we built Traffic Cop, right? We put many years of investment into it. We launched it back at the end of 2019 and have iterated it over that time. And we built Traffic Cop into something that is a holistic solution, right? And we've worked very closely with Google. We presented it to them. They looked deep into our technology, and that turned into 2 different Google Innovation of the Year awards. We had our first one in 2020 for Traffic Cop itself, and then we had a second one in 2022 for some of the innovations that we built to make Traffic Cop more holistic, to detect ad setup policy violations, right? These are things like overlapping ads, aggressive refreshes, ads showing off the page, right? Because those are also invalid activity, and those can also create Google clawbacks, and it can create terminations, right? There's many other things that can create these very harsh punishments, and Traffic Cop has been built to protect against those. So something that that's why we've kind of built this solution, so we can protect publishers and now GCPPs, MCMs, and even SSPs.
So that's a good point. Obviously, you mentioned the supply side audience that we have today with us for this webinar, and so for them, considering Traffic Cop versus other approaches, right? How does Traffic Cop address clawbacks, ad policy violations, and Google compliance where others may not be as specific?
Yeah, so for the supply side platforms, the SSPs, we can help them out in terms of providing that that data in terms of the invalid traffic percentage, right? What the risk factor is, because it's also this is something that advertisers, they want to see this type of data, and they want to be more informed in terms of the quality of domains that they're advertising on. So we can provide that API to SSPs so they can better inform their advertisers, and they can better choose which domains to actually work with, right? It can be incorporated into their screening strategy.
Got it. And for SSPs who may be newer to a tool like this, what kind of result can they expect, for their publishers after implementing Traffic Cop?
So this could be kind of like a differentiated aspect for SSPs, right? They provide the data, to these advertisers so they can determine what domains that should an advertiser actually, advertise on? Because, there's a greater focus in the industry towards quality, right? There's a greater focus towards advertising on higher quality domains with higher quality traffic, because they want to know if they're buying traffic, if they're buying clicks, they want it to come from a genuine human user, right? So it's actually a nice point of differentiation for SSPs to be able to provide this data to domains.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the points too, just to add, is one of the lesser known benefits of traffic op, right, is that ability to minimize business risk and provide peace of mind, right? So that's a big factor that, a lot of people aren't necessarily thinking about as a top line benefit. So Kian, so obviously on the call today, we have a lot of GCP peers, right, who may be wondering, why should they trust another GCPP, right? Why does it make sense for them to work with another company in their own space?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we're a GCPP as well. We're the only GCPP that actually provides an invalid traffic solution. And the important thing here is we are focused on this use case, right? We've been able to solve it for ourselves. As you've seen, it was a very damaging scenario. It was the toughest time in our business, and we do not want to see this happening for other GCPs or MCMs, right? So we have access to monetization data, which other IVT solutions do not, right? We've been able to solve it for ourselves. We've lived and breathed this same business model of the other GCPs and MCMs out there, right? And we have really quality sell-side data. We're focused on this specific use case of preventing Google terminations and clawbacks, right? And we have specific intel, because we work so closely with Google to be able to solve for this issue and protect not just publishers, but GCPPs and MCMs, right? Because this is where we're focused on. We want to clean up the ecosystem of ad fraud. Yes, we do offer monetization tech and services, but our core focus is eliminating ad fraud within the ecosystem. And, we started by offering it to publishers, right? And we can go, implementing this one domain at a time, but it's much faster to actually clean up the ecosystem by working with networks, right? Rather than going one publisher or domain at a time, we can work with thousands at a time by working with GCPPs, MCMs, and SSPs, right? So we've gone through the pain. We've built the technology to prevent it so that you can focus on growing your business confidently. And it's the way to clean up the ecosystem the fastest is by working with GCPPs, MCMs, and SSPs like yourselves to provide the data to prevent some of these terminations and clawbacks, right? Like ad setup policy violations, site navigation, content issues, copyright. Like we have the dashboard so that you can see what's happening. You can be notified, or we can prevent it, right? We can block this invalid traffic from viewing or clicking on any of the ads. You can get reports on click spam, so you can replicate the issues. You can actually get data so that you can choose which publishers, which domains to actually work with. If you see a high IVT percentage for particular domains, you can just shut off monetization, right? Too risky. You only want to work with quality ones. You want to provide value and have a good relationship with your advertisers. And it's important for them to know that you are filtering out the low quality domains, the MFAs, the publishers that either do not have good intent or they're not making a big enough effort to bring in quality traffic and a quality user experience for their audience.
Awesome. Thanks, Kian. Yeah. And just to offer to GCPPs on the call, if you have any follow-up questions or want to dig into this further, please do reach out. Obviously, Kian's very forthcoming. And if you do have any questions or concerns, we're very available. So, Kian, first of all, thank you for all of the valuable information shared. Just wanted to offer to you before we move into Q&A, any kind of parting comments or summary that you want to share with the audience?
Yeah, so really glad that you guys joined us for this webinar. I hope it was you learned a few things here. I think the most important thing is to build that traffic quality management, that overall compliance strategy to protect your networks, your publishers from these painful situations. Like I hope what happened with us back in 2014 does not happen again. We know that Google is prioritizing cleaning up supply. So things are only going to get tougher. They're going to get more strict. So it's really important to kind of like focus on building out a strategy, whether it's an internal strategy, using some type of technology. The important thing is that you're intentional about it and that you're using technology that works and that is focused on this specific use case, protecting against Google terminations and revenue clawbacks.
Awesome. Thanks, Kian. That's great. The good news is I also see some questions rolling in. So now we'll take some time. We'll move to Q&A, and I'll just tee them up for you, Kian, if you don't mind knocking them out of the park here. So first question, what happens if somebody intentionally sends bot traffic or invalid traffic to our site?
So it depends on what your setup is. Like if you do not have any technology running that prevents this type of traffic, then this publisher where they sent the traffic will get terminated by Google, and they'll get a clawback, most likely 100% clawback, up to 90 days in revenue.
And let's assume, Kian, which perhaps they meant, is if Traffic Cop is installed, tool like Traffic Cop, then how would Traffic Cop help mitigate something like that?
Yeah, so if Traffic Cop's implemented, then and it's implemented on block mode, so it's actually blocking this traffic. So all this bot traffic would receive a CAPTCHA, right? So it gives the opportunity, if it's actually a human user, maybe they're using a VPN and they're kind of like in this gray area in terms of risk factor, then the human user has the ability to solve the CAPTCHA, and then they can see the website and the ads just like normal, right? So we can eliminate any of those false positives. But for any of the bot traffic, they would not have access to viewing ads or clicking ads. So that publisher and the GCPP that's working with the publisher would be protected from the clawbacks and terminations.
Awesome. Thanks, Kian. Next question. Could you share a little bit more detail on how the product actually detects IVT? The question, they're curious how it differs from other solutions in the marketplace.
So the biggest difference is that we're hyper-focused into this kind of like use case, right? We're hyper-focused toward protecting publishers on the sell side and protecting GCPPs, MCMs, and SSPs. So all on the sell side, right? Most of the other IVT solutions, they focus on buy side, right? They're working with DSPs, they're working with advertisers. Maybe they also focus on brand safety, right? So the actual invalid traffic on the sell side is like an afterthought, right? It might be like a tertiary offering. Like this is what we eat, sleep, and dream. We focus on the sell side. We use it ourselves. We're always iterating it. We even have tested it against some of the most sophisticated invalid traffic within APAC, where we see in APAC, there's IVT tends to be much higher than other regions. So we've really tested it out. We've pretty much put it through like the boot camp for invalid traffic. And we're always releasing new algorithms because it's always an arms race, right? Invalid traffic of today is going to be different for invalid traffic of tomorrow, right? They're always iterating it. So it's always important for us to continue to invest, to make our algorithms more sophisticated, to detect the new type of techniques to build invalid traffic. And that's why it's so important to us to be focused, because also we're protecting for all the other Google terms and conditions. And Google changes the terms and conditions on a regular basis, right? Before, site navigation issues wasn't an issue like 2 years ago, right? But now it's a new type of termination, and we built technology to detect it and notify publishers, right? And Google's going to come up with new ones, right? Some are going to become more important. Some are going to be more punishing, right? And we're always working very closely with Google to understand the changes and to incorporate it into our technology and to how we run our compliance. And we can provide some of those updates and some of that education to the MCMs, GCPPs, and SSPs that we work with.
Awesome. Thanks, Ken. So next one up, is there any guarantee that we don't get clawbacks above 2% and no MCM terminations or no terminations of our account?
So there isn't a guarantee, right? As everybody knows, Google Trust and Safety is a black box, right? We've been able to understand it to a high level, but it is still a black box, right? We've been able to build our algorithms to replicate it as much as we can, better than any company out there, because we're so specialized. But their algorithms are always changing, and it's kept as a black box intentionally, right? So there's no company in the world that is 100% replicates the Google algorithms in terms of what is invalid traffic. However, I'm confident that we are the best in terms of replicating that and preventing it and keeping up with these changes that are commonly happening on the Google side and on the the invalid traffic side, the companies, the hackers that are creating this invalid traffic. So that's why we don't provide a guarantee. It's impossible to be 100% compliant. However, as you've seen from one of the previous slides, we've there was a study done in terms of the results of Traffic Cop, and we were able to reduce the revenue clawbacks by an average of 87%.
Got it. Thanks, Ken. So next question up, kind of a scenario-based question. So what if a scenario where a publisher removes our API or JavaScript and intentionally sends IVT?
In a situation like that, you would essentially be at risk, right? Like if, say, Traffic Cop was not on page, they took it off, then you would be at risk. So there's a way to implement Traffic Cop with your ad tags, where in order to run monetization, you also have to run Traffic Cop as well, right? So we can set up those, have that type of setup so that you wouldn't be at risk, because you wouldn't want that type of loophole. We have seen publishers that have that malintent, and they try to inflate their revenues and traffic with invalid traffic. And absolutely, you don't want to be vulnerable for something like that. So we can work with each one of the MCM, GCPPs, and SSPs to make sure that you're protected from something like that.
Thanks, Ken. I think what we'll do one more question, and then please know if you did submit a question and we haven't gotten to it, we'll absolutely answer it post-webinar, as well as we'll be doing follow-up. So I do see a few questions come in related to Traffic Cop pricing, so on and so forth. We'd love to handle that post-webinar. There is some baseline pricing on our website as well, so please check out monetizemore.com. But we will respond to each one of the questions we didn't have time to get to after the webinar as well. Okay, so last one, could you explain the integration process for your technology, and do you provide APIs or on-page setups?
Yep. So we provide both APIs and on-page setups. And on the API side, we can also integrate with your platform. So you can take the reporting data of what the IVT percentage is for a domain, even for the UTMs, for if a publisher is buying traffic and they want to know what the IVT is for when they're buying through Google or Meta or Outbrain. They can see that even for the campaigns that they're running within those buying platforms. So we can provide that API. And in terms of like what the setup looks like, we have a 14-day trial that you can test out with a couple of your domains up to 5 million page views, just to see, what, check out the platform, get, acquainted with it, understand the data that we provide and some of the other potential policy violations that we protect against, and provide data so that you can actually prevent them yourselves. And then we can go through the setup. You can set it up on measure mode. And then once you're through the trial, and then if you want to move forward, we can set up a contract, and then we can set up the traffic cop technology, the on-page setup across your whole network, so that your publishers are protected, whether you want to run on measure mode and look at the data and decide which domains to filter out from working with, or we can set it up on block mode, where you're actually preventing the invalid traffic and you're getting all the reporting to detect any of the potential policy violations and get the data so that you can replicate those issues and work with your publishers to fix any of the policy violation issues before it becomes a bigger problem. Right. So we can work with you on that, and we're able to give you a 14-day free trial to start.
Awesome. Thanks, Kian. And I just want to back up the slide here. We have a QR code. If you want to engage and set up a call with our team, you can do so there, or as I mentioned, through monetizemore.com. I just want to take a minute. Kian, thank you for sharing so many insights around this and answering questions. I want to quickly thank our audience for the questions and sharing some opinions in our polls as well. And we're almost done. Kian, I just want to give you the final word to sign off. And thank you, everybody.
Awesome. Thanks, Braden. Yeah, thanks everyone for coming, right? Step number one is understanding Google compliance, right? Invalid traffic is one of the biggest risks to publishers, to GCPPs, to MCMs and SSPs. So first, it's important to understand, and we're here for you. If you have any questions, we put out a lot of content about all these Google compliance issues, invalid traffic. It's not easy to understand. It's a very complex world, and it's always changing. So consider us like your translators to Google compliance, right? Looking through all the terms and conditions, it might be too much, it might be too complicated, right? It absolutely is. We can translate it for us. Reach out, we're friendly help for you, and we can be your partners to setting up this strategy to protect yourself from Google terminations and clawbacks.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Everyone.
Thanks again, Kian. Take care. Stay tuned for the next one.